Keetharuth to report to the committee. Ms. Keetharuth, you have the floor.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for the second time, I provide an update on the dire human rights situation in Eritrea, resulting in mass departures of 4,000 monthly. I congratulate the government of Eritrea for its accession to the UN Convention Against Torture in September 2014. I hope Eritrea will take the required effective legislative, administrative and judicial measures to prevent acts of torture. I urge the government to also accept the inquiry procedure under Article 20 of the Convention and to accede to its optional protocol establishing a system whereby independent monitors regularly visit places of detention. I have welcomed Eritrea's high-level engagement in its second Universal Periodic Review in February. Nonetheless, Eritrea's poor performance in implementing the recommendations from the first review and its selective approach to those during the second round demonstrates a lack of goodwill in addressing the prevailing serious human rights situation. I encourage the government of Eritrea to reconsider accepting the remaining recommendations, namely those dealing with torture following its accession to the Convention Against Torture. Excellencies, regretfully, the Eritrean government continues to deny me access into the country. Since taking up my mandate, I sent requests to 23 other countries. 5 member states allowed me to interview Eritrean refugees and migrants on their territories for my second round of reporting. I have 2 outstanding invitations, which, should the security situation permit, I am keen to accept. I appeal to the other 14 countries that still have not responded or responded negatively to grant me access to facilitate the delivery of my mandate. Distinguished delegates, let me now turn to the findings of my recent visit to Italy from the 22nd to 26th September of this year, and those contained in my second report. I continue to be concerned about persisting systematic and widespread violations in Eritrea, compelling thousands to seek refuge outside their country. Eritreans are fleeing indefinite forced conscription and violations in the context of the national service, arbitrary arrest and detention, incommunicado detention, inhumane prison conditions, extrajudicial killings, disappearances and torture, especially following the attempted coup on 21st January 2013, the Forto incident. An unknown number of people, though some quote as many as 800, including public figures, were reportedly arrested and detained, with no information as to their whereabouts, nor have they appeared before any court of law. I also collected testimonies detailing the deteriorating economic situation. Many families would find it difficult to survive without support from the diaspora. According to the recently released Global Hunger Index from 2014, the level of hunger in Eritrea is extremely alarming. Poor health care and lack of adequate medication leaves treatment in neighboring countries as the only option, yet unaffordable for many. Power cuts, fuel and water shortages are also common occurrences. Excellencies, the distressing human rights situation in the country has spurred thousands of Eritreans to flee, despite life-threatening risk during flight. Violations experienced during the flight require urgent and in-depth examination in another context. The number of Eritrean asylum seekers and refugees crossing into neighboring countries has increased considerably, with 4,000 monthly compared to 2,000 last year. Between January and September 2014, 32,537 Eritreans arrived in Italy by boat, with Syrians and Eritreans constituting the largest group of arrivals. In June 2014, UNHCR noted that the number of Eritrean asylum seekers has reached unprecedented levels. The increase in Eritrean asylum claims was particularly significant during the third quarter of 2014, when 14,600 applied for asylum in 44 industrialized countries, the highest quarterly level for this nationality ever recorded. By September 2014, 2,498 unaccompanied Eritrean children had registered with UNHCR in Ethiopia. At the same time, 1,010 unaccompanied Eritrean children were registered with UNHCR in Kassala, Sudan, with 20% being girls. However, these figures do not include the many unaccompanied children coming indirectly from Eritrea through Ethiopia, who rarely register with UNHCR in Sudan. By mid-October, more than 4,000 Eritrean minors had arrived in Italy since the beginning of the year, including more than 3,200 children traveling without their parents. These children risked their lives to escape from looming military training and conscription, amounting to forced labor, to join family members, or in the hope of finding better circumstances across borders. They are extremely vulnerable and run the risk of exposure to abuse and violence. The numbers only reflect those who make it to Europe. We do not know how many children perish along flight routes. Those unaccompanied minors require special protection. National Service was originally conceived as a nation-building program, yet today it is one of the main drivers spurring thousands of Eritreans to flee. Its indefinite nature goes beyond the 18-month originally envisaged, with no comprehensive demobilization program. The majority of conscripts serve in the military for most of their working lives for a paltry salary. Women are particularly vulnerable during military service and at risk of sexual abuse by both officers and with responsibilities in the chain of command, or by peers. Grade 12 students are conscripted into the armed forces and undergo military training at the Sawa military training camp, some of them being minors. The penalties for draft evasion and desertion can be up to 5 years imprisonment. In cases where draft evaders and deserters remain untraceable, family members are often punished instead. The ILO Committee of Experts on several occasions concluded that the national service in Eritrea constitutes forced labor. Excellencies, while recommendations are detailed in my report, I once again call on the Eritrean government to end the indefinite national service, limiting it to strictly 18 months as originally envisaged, to stop the militarization of secondary education, requiring students to spend 3 months during their 12th grade at the Sawa military training camp, to stop punishing family members of draft evaders and deserters, to put in place a comprehensive demobilization program. I call on the international community to ascertain that development cooperation undergoes stringent due diligence processes to ensure it fully respects international human rights norms and standards, to ensure the protection of those fleeing Eritrea, in particular unaccompanied children, by respecting the principle of non-refoulement and by granting at least temporary protection. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, the human rights violations in Eritrea are committed with impunity. To date, no perpetrators have been brought to justice. Consequently, I welcome the establishment of a commission of inquiry by the Human Rights Council during its 26th session to investigate all violations of human rights in Eritrea, as outlined in my reports. The violations I describe have a severe human impact and relate to a touching human story. No matter what circumstances are, people must be treated with humanity and with respect for their inherent dignity. I maintain my offer for a frank, meaningful, and open dialogue with on the human rights situation with the government of Eritrea. I thank you.
I thank the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Eritrea for her statement.
Excellency Osman Mohamed Saleh, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea.
The demographic, economic, political, and cultural realities of its member states bear little resemblance to the past. The challenges of the time and the demands of the age are vastly different from those of the period following the Second World War or even the past few decades. Change, rapid transformative change, is the order of the day. And yet, the United Nations, the organization that ostensibly represents the entire community of nations and the peoples of the world, remains stuck in the past. It remains thoroughly dominated by the few and has marginalized the overwhelming majority. Its institutions and structures are anachronism in the modern world. More crucially, the United Nations has fallen far short of playing the primary role in the pursuit of the fundamental objectives for which it was established. Maintaining global peace and security was and remains one of its cardinal goals, and yet conflicts and wars, even simultaneous wars, multiple wars, have become a constant feature of our lives. Many of these wars are waged in total disregard for the United Nations and without its mandate. In Africa, from the east to the west, and in the north, in the Middle East, and in all continents, extremism, terrorism, and all forms of bigotry and intolerance are spreading. The record in regard to other key principles and aspirations is also far from satisfactory. Whether it is ending poverty, ensuring sustainable development, advancing human rights, avoiding epidemics, respecting sovereignty and non-interference in the affairs of others, ensuring justice and equality, as well as protecting the environment. Undoubtedly, the world is facing a very grave and dangerous situation. To paraphrase the Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, this is, I quote, terrible time for the principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter, unquote. Mr. President, to restore the relevance and credibility of the United Nations, to turn it into a truly representative institution of all nations and people, where all nations, no matter how big or small, respect its charter and international law, where all nations contribute, each according to its capabilities for peace and security, as well as the welfare of the people and the planet, it is imperative that we fundamentally restructure, indeed democratize and rebuild the United Nations. This crucial and pressing need to restructure the United Nations has been clear for several decades now, starting from the heyday of the Cold War and throughout the past 25 years, during which the world lived through an unsuccessful effort to impose a unipolar world. Consequently, United Nations reform has formally been on the agenda for close to 2 decades. No nation has openly disputed the need to restructure the United Nations. Many workable proposals have been presented and thoroughly discussed, and yet we are no nearer to change because of the stubborn and cynical opposition of the dominant powers. Given the determination of these powers to maintain their control of the United Nations and its unrepresentative and undemocratic character, the chances of genuine change in the coming few years are indeed slender. In fact, to add insult to injury, it has imposed unjust sanctions on their country. This travesty of justice has caused harm not only to Eritrea, but to the entire Horn of Africa region, which is now mired in endemic conflicts and instability. Once again, and from this restaurant, Eritrea calls on the United Nations and the United Nations Security Council to redress this injustice by taking concrete measures to end the illegal occupation of sovereign Eritrean territory. The unjust and unfair sanctions for which everyone now agrees that there was no and is no justification must also unconditionally and immediately be lifted. Such long overdue measures would contribute positively to the tireless efforts of the Eritrean people to build their nation, maintain peace, stability and harmony, improve their livelihood, lay the foundation of strong, equitable national economy, create opportunities for youth and women, and advance regional and international engagement and cooperation. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Eritrea for his statement.